right, welcome to my channel, Anglican Aesthetics. I'm here with the Anglican Catechetical Initiative, and thankful for Logan and JT. They're with me here as well, and this always just gives me so much life. And it's always a joy to go through Richard Hooker with these brothers and sisters. If you are interested in the Anglican Catechetical Initiative, we're actually starting up two groups soon, two more groups of people who are interested. One going through Richard Fields of the Church, and the other going through John Jewell's Apology of the Church of England. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to link my Patreon below to which has a video that explains a little bit more of the vision of what we're doing here. But in this video, we're going to work our way through Book 4 of the Laws. So as always, I'm going to just give kind of an overview, and then we'll talk about it. So in chapters 1 through 2, Richard Hooker lays out the principles for his defense of ceremonies over and against the Puritans. The Puritans at this time are objecting to the ceremonies of the Church of England by virtue of being A, too ornate, and B, too popish. They resemble the Roman Catholic Church, ergo bad. We'll unpack why they think that in a second here. And Hooker addresses this argument specifically in this book. But he lays out a general principle for the defense of ceremonies. And he says in chapter 1 and chapter 2 that God often attached sensible signs to verbal realities to illustrate those realities. So think, for example, about when Abraham is cutting a covenant in Genesis 15 with the Lord. What does he do? He cuts two animals, they're laid open, and the fire pot, representing the holy presence of God, goes through the path that's been carved by the cutting of these animals. And that represents, in this sort of sensible way, the holy presence of God saying, if I do not fulfill these promises, may this happen to me. And of course, because the immortal God in the divine nature cannot be cut in half, it means that the promise is certain. And we see this pattern throughout the Old Testament, where God attaches sensible signs to his word so as to sort of vividly illustrate and impress that word into the minds and hearts of its people. Now, the Puritans are going to assert that the most simple and primitive ceremonies are the best ones. And we should avoid those ceremonies that resemble the Church of Rome. And to give an anticipation of why, they're going to say, well, just as the people of Israel separated from the people of Canaan through these external signs and through not partaking of these ceremonies, so we should separate ourselves from the Church of Rome, even in things indifferent. But Richard Hooker starts to note the inconsistency here. Puritans used godparent sponsors in baptism. They had parents speak on behalf of their children, or godparents who committed themselves to the baptized. They used wafer cakes and unleavened bread in the Eucharist. They didn't meet by streams or in houses or in the underground like the early church did. They met in church buildings. And Hooker is going to use these inconsistencies as part of the foundation of his response. In chapters 3 through 4, we sort of read the dialectic between the Puritans and Richard Hooker. So the Puritans say we should endeavor to be unlike pagans, just as Israel endeavored to be unlike Canaan, ergo abolish Roman ceremonies because the Romanists are pagans. And Hooker grants just for the sake of argument. Now, earlier on, if you've been following along in the laws so far, you'll note that Hooker says several times that the Church of Rome is a true church. The Church of Rome is a true church, even if in grave error. Here, he's going to take a different strategy. He's going to just grant, for the sake of argument, that they're pagans and see how far that actually gets the Puritans. And his argument is that even if we said they were pagans, it still doesn't follow that we should actually cut ourselves off from all external resemblances to the Church of Rome. Christians meet in buildings designated for places of worship as places of worship, even though that's not commanded in Scripture, and even though pagans do that and have always done that. And the Puritans are going to say, well, you know what? We can devise better ceremonies than the Roman Church, and so we should stick to those. So, for instance, at this time, they're advocating for the use of what's called the Geneva gown. And if you've ever seen the Geneva gown, it's an academic robe that's all black that the presbyters of Geneva would use to preach. And the thinking was that this gives our presbyters a more academic sort of air, a more serious air about them, and so that's better than the custom of the church. And Hooker is going to say that's really subjective. you can't say that's like, on what basis are you just saying that that's better? And so his argument is essentially to say, prove it by some general council or a legitimate authority that ceremony is better because their methinks that a Geneva ground is more appropriate. That won't cut it. That's just pure subjectivism, and that doesn't provide a reason to overturn the long-standing custom of the church. In chapters 6 through 7, Hooker reiterates the fact that Puritans retain godparents, and so the sheer fact that pagans do X is not a reason to do it. And he says the following, quote, "Thus we may therefore safely conclude that it is not evil simply to concur with the heathens, either in opinion or in action, and that conformity with them is only then a disgrace, when either we follow them in that which they think and do amiss, or follow them generally in that which they do without other reason than merely the liking we have for the pattern of their example, which liking intimates a more universal approbation of them than is allowable." So, for instance, think about Israel's demand for a king. We want a king. Why? Because we want to be like the pagan nations. That's not a good reason to institute a ceremony, surely because you want to be like pagans around you. But he's going to argue the ceremonies of the church don't fall into that category. In chapters 8 through 10, he points out that the reason for this is because Roman Catholics, and now he's going to attack that fundamental idea that somehow they're pagans, they're much closer to us, right, than demon worshippers, like worshippers of Belial, or Muslims. The right remedy to abuse, then, is right proportion and not overreaction. So he says the following, quote, "We are contrariwise of opinion that he who will not perfectly recover the sick, or he who will perfectly recover the sick and restore a diseased body unto health, must not endeavor so much to bring it to a state of simple contrariety as a fit proportion in contrariety unto those evils which are to be cured. He that will take away extreme heat by setting the body in an extremity of cold shall undoubtedly remove the disease, but together with it, the diseased too." You're going to kill the person. "The first thing, therefore, in skillful cures is the knowledge of the part affected. The next is of the evil which doth affect it. The last is not only of the kind, but also of the measure of contrary things whereby to remove it." I think there's a very valuable lesson there from Richard Hooker, that the answer to error is not the opposite error. I think we actually see this quite a bit in our culture today, that maybe the answer to liberalism is Nick Fuentes, right? Or the answer to the sort of rampant liberal abuses of the church today is a radical traditionalism. Hooker's answer is the remedy to evil is not doing the utter contrary thing, but rather to correct the disproportion. And that's, to my mind, again, Hooker's always ever level-headed. Then he points out that antiquity is our standard, not Rome. Quote, "They are the ancient rites and customs of the Church of Christ, whereof ourselves being a part, we have the selfsame interest in them which our fathers before us had, from whom the same are descended unto us." So, from Hooker's perspective, representing the other Anglican divines at the time, the Church of England was not a brand new church started by Henry VIII. That's just a falsehood. It's rather the church, the Church Catholic in England, reformed by the gospel. So, as such, the Church of England of the Reformation saw herself as a descendant of that church prior to her that extends all the way back to Augustine of Canterbury. Now, the Puritans, their response is going to be interesting. So in chapter 11, one of their objections to maintaining some of the ceremonies that look like Roman Catholic ceremonies is that the ceremonies look Jewish. And as we all know, the Jews are bad. It's part of the reasoning here. The thinking is that if the Jews are evil, then we should seek we should seek a dissimilarity with the Jews as well, and therefore abolish those customs that look Jewish. But Hooker's response is, well, God gave the laws of the Old Testament so that something looks Jewish can't itself be an evil. I think it's a pretty simple response, but I think some people need to hear that today. So Hooker goes on. He says bad customs. He then points out when there are certain customs that the Puritans charged the Church of Rome for inaugurating for bad reasons, maybe simply to look like the Jews or simply to appeal to pagans or whatever. And Hooker's argument is that, in response to that charge, is that bad customs can eventually lose their property of scandal and that original purpose for which they were instituted. So, for instance, our calendar today, that we use today, is modeled off of Greek gods, Greek and Roman gods, in their honor. And of course, we do not attribute that honor anymore that the calendar once had. It has lost that over time. And so that even if it was instituted, his argument is, for a bad reason, that still doesn't show we should uproot it now. And then he makes, I think, a really fascinating observation about what I've called the tyranny of the weaker conscience. Some of the Puritans argue, well, these ceremonies are scandalizing the faithful. Kneeling for communion looks Roman Catholic, and for some people, that's an inducement to return to the Church of Rome. But Hooker's response is to say this, quote, we are not to look that the church should change her public laws and ordinances made according to that which is judged ordinarily and commonly fittest for the whole, although it chance that for some particular men the same be found inconvenient. Here's the idea. Suppose there's some general celebration you're having at your church, right? Maybe a celebration of a baptism, right? After, that's pretty common at many churches, many parishes. After maybe the baptism of an infant, the parents have a sort of celebration and the church is invited to come. And let's say maybe one or two people are like, man, this reminds me of like Roman Catholicism. The right answer is not to shut down the party for the sake of those one or two people. And his point is that the weaker conscience sort of objection, that applies in situations where you're dealing with individuals and not the good of the community. So for instance, if I'm getting lunch with a friend, right? My friend is like, they're really disturbed by me eating meat. In that individual sort of one-on-one context, at that point, I might condescend to their conscience. But when we're talking about the good of a community, when a community is generally united in an opinion, we don't change that opinion if it's not intrinsically evil, but tends towards the edification of the whole for the sake of some who find it an occasion to stumble. I think it's a very interesting principle that I want to think through more. I think it's right, but I'd love to chat about that a little bit more. Now, in chapter 13, and this is the last chapter, the Puritans argue that we should show unity with the Reformed churches in our external ceremonies, the continental Reformed churches, rather than the Roman church in externals, because we're united with them, with the Reformed churches. Hooker's response is that churches are bound to a unity of faith, but not necessarily a unity of ceremonies, except in a particular case, and he outlines that particular case as follows, quote, whereby it plainly appeareth that in things indifferent, what the whole church doth think convenient for the whole, the same if any part do willfully violate, it may be reformed and inrailed again by that general authority whereunto each particular is subject, and that the spirit of singularity in a few ought to give place unto public judgment. This doth clearly enough appear, but not that all Christian churches are bound in every indifferent ceremony to be uniform, because where the whole hath not tied the parts unto one and the same thing, they being therein left to each their own choice, they either do as others do, or else otherwise without any breach of duty at all. So his argument is that particular churches are actually subject to ceremonies instituted by the church as a whole. And that for the same reason that, let's again return to that basement party, right? Susie and Mark have a baptism for their child. The whole church is invited to celebrate, and Bob in the corner over there says, "Well, this sniffs papists," right? You don't shut down the whole party of the good of the community for the sake of that one particular person who finds something that's not intrinsically evil on occasion to stumble. In a similar way, you don't overturn the ceremonies of the church that have persisted throughout the whole for the sake of some particular individual churches that might stumble over those ceremonies. Rather, again, think back to that initial principle. You correct the abuses with right proportion, and you teach your people to correct the abuses with right proportion. In the next book, he's actually then going to start to apply that to particular ceremonies here. So that's the overview. I'm going to add Logan and JT back. So before we start thinking through this with particular questions, any general thoughts, questions, or comments?
I think probably the biggest complaint I've heard about Anglicanism generally is that idea that there are ceremonies that seem a little too close to Rome and could cause people to stumble if they were to look at it. I remember, yeah, that's kind of like, for instance, the confession in the confession and absolution and morning prayer.
Yeah.
That's raised some eyebrows among my peers, and it's kind of a I want to think over Hooker's response a little bit, because that I think my response would be something similar to, well, just because some people have used it doesn't mean we need to just throw it away. It's not like
Yep.
the Roman Catholics own the idea of confession and absolution.
Right. Yeah.
But how do you give that sense to, like, if you're a rector priest over a small church, how do you let a whole your congregation know that when you give them the absolution during the service, you're not doing the exact same thing necessarily as the Roman Catholics believe?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. There has to be a context of catechesis, and this is where I think confirmation plays a huge role in the life of the church. Where in confirmation, it's incumbent on the presbyters to reteach again and again what we think absolution does. That yes, absolution does affect the forgiveness of sins, but not in the manner of lifting some temporal debt so you still have some temporal debt left to make satisfaction for, but actually by way of that word being a kind of renewal of your baptism itself. So that word bringing back to your soul the refreshment of your baptism.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a huge part. So catechesis, I think, is really important. When I'm thinking about Hooker's response, there are two sort of there are two ways to go, and it's interesting to me that he leaned into the let's just grant that they're pagan for the sake of argument, like in at the beginning of the book. That was really yeah. It caught me actually. I forgot he did that actually.
Yeah.
I to some extent I think that response is fair. I actually personally think the second half of the book of book 4 is much stronger than the first half, because I think it's a much stronger response to say the whole church does confession and absolution. It's not just the Church of Rome; it's also the East. It's also the Oriental. It's also Lutherans too.
Yeah.
So why does everyone think that that's an important thing to do? And to take it a cue from the whole as instructive, I think is a better sort of way, at least to my mind. It's a better way to go about it than to just grant, well, let's just for the sake of argument grant that Rome is pagan. Yeah, that's how I would do it. For some people, maybe granting that Rome is pagan, maybe that makes the argument stronger. I was just kind of like, when I read that, I was like, I don't know how that makes sense. Yeah.
I don't think I definitely thought the second part was stronger as well.
Yeah.
But I guess how I viewed it was, I wondered if it was almost kind of like preempting the most extreme of the Puritans.
Yeah.
Some of them, if you said like, well, the church has accepted this thing, they might say, well, that's not the church.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, let's say that isn't the church. Well, you still have to follow it because of this reason.
Yeah.
Even if you want to say they're not the church anymore, they weren't the church for however long, whatever some extreme Puritan might want to say. So I guess it's probably just preempting that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And I think that's right. That does seem to match the rhetorical strategy there, is he's just going to concede the most extreme things and then say your principles are still undermined.
Yeah. And of course, I'm sure if, that was a bigger portion of the period that became a bigger thing in this time, he probably would have made more arguments in that line, but also probably saying how their position by itself doesn't make sense, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I think it was just kind of like, in case you're kind of on that radical wing, like it still doesn't make sense why you're doing this or why you suggest this.
Yeah.
I would say the thing I've really appreciated, my general thought, every time we read Hooker, it's like, man, there's a lot of stuff that goes on today that I feel like this exact thing is happening today. And
yes,
here he is, 400 years ago talking about it.
Yep.
Or longer than 400, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. About 4, 5. Yeah. It's like 400 and 400 and I think 80, 440 years. Yeah. 440.
I think that's right. Yeah. But like even the part of the small group being scandalized.
Yeah.
Like, well, we can't do this thing because the small group being scandalized. That's so big today.
Yeah.
I was thinking, it's like, I've heard so many stories about that exact thing. It's amazing that it's just like, I don't know, it's just like combating this issue then. And in some ways today, you can actually see that exists within a bunch of groups. I mean, that exists within Anglicanism. You can see some people kind of going, well, this is scandalizing for some groups, so we'll jump down. Yeah, you see that even among Roman Catholics or Lutherans. I've seen that pretty much from every denomination, where they might not do certain practices, or they'll go a certain way because it feels scandalizing to this subset.
Now, I do wonder, to some degree, if there's something, like if it's particularly with things indifferent. I mean, specifically with things indifferent. Like, I would think of an example I might have might be icons. Like if there were a small group that were led astray into idolatry because you had icons in your church, it's a little bit more indifferent. We don't think that's necessary.
Right.
Maybe that could be good grounds to say, okay, we might take those icons down, or at least draw attention to them so that these people don't get led astray in that. I think that might just be a reasonable instance of just good shepherding.
Yes. Yep.
And that's probably where you need a priest who's actually engaged with his congregation pretty closely. He knows what people are thinking. And he's not just showing up there to consecrate the Eucharist, preach 15 minutes, and then go home.
Yep. And that's a good word. And I think what helps with icons too is that, even today, it's not the case that even every Roman parish, like every Latin Rite parish, has icons in them. And so even in places where icon veneration is acceptable, the church hasn't seen fit to sort of, until post the Second Ecumenical Council, and then there was a walking back, but there were problems with the Second Ecumenical Council. The church hasn't seen fit to, even where it's seen acceptable, to then just make everyone do it. at least until then. You know?
Mhm.
Which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, even practically now, I mean, we would never see someone in the at the very least, the Roman Church. I'm pretty confident even the Eastern churches most would not do this. Be like, oh, you're not bowing, you're not kissing the icon. You
Yeah.
have to do this. Like, I get they might, you might get some fringe people who say that, but if you actually go to these parishes,
Yeah.
Some
there's no
online
way they're doing that.
humor.
Yeah, there's no way the Eastern Orthodox priest is going to be like, oh, you didn't kiss that icon.
Yep.
You you do everything else great. That one thing.
We go on an entirely different rant about Nicaea too, but I think that's probably
Yeah.
I just think, practically,
you make a good point, particularly with Anglicanism. There's much less of a pressure, I think.
Yeah.
It's some, what is it? All can, some may, none must.
Yep. That's exactly right. Yep.
Now, if I could just remember it in Latin.
Well, what did you guys make? So I think that the tyranny of the weaker conscience sort of thing. I forget where I picked up that phrase from, not Hooker, from somewhere else, but I don't remember where actually. But I think that's basically summarizing the concept here. What do you guys think about that, Prince? I think that it's such an interesting thing to bring up because he is right that there are times like that party example, right? You wouldn't just shut down the whole church party because like a couple of people are like, oh wow, this feels like popery or whatever. Like they at some point they just have to grow up, you know. How do you guys think the balance should be? How does a presbyter, shepherds, how do they determine when to strike that balance?
It probably it does always definitely a very case by case issue. I mean, I guess my initial thought is if it was something where it was like 100% in the okay camp. Let's say there's someone kneeling. There was people like, we should never have kneeling. This is so awful to have kneeling. I think it would be on the priest, like, no, kneeling is okay. Like people can kneel. Someone, let's say, I know not every congregation kneels, right? Some do, some don't.
Right.
And let's say there's a case where some people do, some people don't, and people are really upset that some people are kneeling. I think it would be on the priest, like, no, they have to be allowed. There's nothing wrong with kneeling. I think there has to be some boundary there. Funny enough, on the party thing, I guess if I for me, even if it became like a baptism party, I guess my thought was, I mean, it's tough. I mean, if you're a rector and like 80% of the people are upset by it.
Yeah, and then
maybe then maybe it's like, okay. I guess that's not
Yeah.
the minority though. But
Yeah, it's not.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like in most cases, as long as it's a sound doctrine, like the priest, it's not like this is not an edge case. If it's a sound doctrine, then the rector should just say, no, they can do this thing. And if it's on a fringe, it probably depends on the issue, but I could see going either way. If it's like an edge case, I mean, if it's asking for intercession from someone, right? I could see how they could be like, hey, we're not going to do that at the parish, right? You guys can do it at home, but we're not going to do it in public or something, or in the parish. I could see a priest maybe making that distinction, even though he might think it's a practice okay to do in a understood way, but he might make that distinction or might cut it off publicly.
I think sometimes it can be a little bit of a hard question when you're a bit of a theology nerd and you've like researched the distinctions between the Anglican view and the Roman Catholic view and the Lutheran view and the Reformed view, and this is all very clear in your mind. It can be a little harder of a question for you in that case than like a lay person who's just coming through it for the first time. So it requires it's an exercise of the practice of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes, thinking, okay, but what will people encounter, and how might I make the encounter as profitable as possible and as unscandalous as possible? Because I know, like, when I've shown off my when I've received my feedback on the confession and absolution, what usually I hear is, well, yeah, you're the theology nerd, so you'd know the distinction between that. But would an ordinary person who comes to morning prayer know the distinction between that? Know that that's not exactly what's going on?
Yeah,
Um,
they should. Yeah, it breaks my heart because it's like it's part of why we need catechesis.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I wonder, maybe this is a little bit of a rant on the idea of catechesis, but there are, like in the Roman Catholic tradition, you have a lot of cradle Catholics,
yeah,
um, people who've gone through the catechesis but
yeah, yeah.
don't
That's
really know as much. Do you think Anglicanism is so susceptible to that possibility?
oh, totally, because it happened in the Episcopal Church.
Mhm.
Like they had catechesis classes in the Episcopal Church for a long time.
Mhm.
And that didn't actually stop the tide of liberalism. So there's this like, I think our problem in the ACNA is that we're so new that we don't have anything like that. Which was, I don't know why we did that, but we did, and here we are. Except the RAC, so I guess slogan you don't have. But like, so the rest of us are, for whatever reason, chose to flounder. I don't know why, but we did.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but that said, I don't think. I think it's kind of actually ironically what Hooker said. The solution is not like, okay, it didn't work to stem the tide of liberalism. Ergo, we're just gonna like not do that and focus more on like we're gonna really be gospel centered.
Mhm.
And I'm like it's not obviously like who would say it's wrong to be gospel centered, right?
Yeah.
But like, but at the same time, like what are the means through which Anglicans have thought the gospel actually comes?
Mhm.
And that part of those means is absolution. How do we
Mhm.
think that? Well, because we think
Yeah.
that the word of absolution is a renewal of your baptism, you know,
Yeah.
things like that. So I tend to think no, like catechesis won't prevent it, but I do think it's necessary. It's necessary but not sufficient. And
Mhm.
it's sort of like what Hooker said of like, okay, the right solution is not to swing in the opposite direction, but
Yeah.
to actually like precisely like a doctor correct the errors, like the
I
broken
like
Mhm.
body.
I like the analogy of the the
Yeah.
stick is bent and you bend it. Uh,
Yeah.
Puritans were saying the way to write a stick that was bent slightly in one direction is to bend it to
Yep.
whatever bent in the one direction in the other direction.
Yep.
And you read that and you're like, oh my gosh, oh, that's an interesting idea.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought Hooker's response was neat.
Yeah. It's so level-headed.
Don't want to remove the
Mhm.
patient.
Yeah. Like, no, why would you do that? You just put it back in the right
Just
spot.
throw him in the frigid cold. Um, I think that, yeah,
You
I
know,
had a little bit more to say, but I forget exactly what it was. So
Mhm.
might hit me like Ben stick. We'll see.
I think I think there was something to be learned, I guess, for the ACNA as a whole. I mean, this is just I guess, my view. I'm sure there's people probably more knowledgeable than me, but I think there was kind of an overreaction in some ways. I mean, it's because it's like, well, tech that kind of went horrible, so we need to swing the other way. And people kind of know that tech kind of leaned into the more Anglo-Catholic,
Mhm.
high church, Anglo-Catholic,
Yeah.
Anglo-Catholic. So I do think in the ACNA you do see that kind of swing back. Well, we can't be that. That's
Yeah.
good. Of course, there's Anglo-Catholics. I'm sure there's some ACNA Anglo-Catholic. We're Anglo-Catholic. Don't say that.
Yeah.
But generally, ACNA did swing more into the evangelical
Yep.
way,
Mhm.
and I think that is actually kind of what Hooker, in some ways, is saying not to do. Not that
Right.
the evangelical is wrong, right?
Right.
Of course, we have low church brothers and they're fully
Mhm.
Anglican. That's
Yeah.
not Anglican. But I think there was that reaction. And I think Hooker is, in some ways, kind of correct that the reaction shouldn't be, well, we just can't be like those high churchmen and the tech who became liberal. You have to, I guess, I
Mhm.
mean, you have to fix it in a proper way. I'm not 100% sure the best way to do that. But, I do think there has to be a more methodical, surgical correction there.
And it's kind of, maybe this is what I was thinking about that I'd forgotten about. Kind of a mindset that I often come back to is Roman Catholics don't own whatever this is that we're debating about. They don't own the idea of confession and
Mhm.
absolution.
Mhm.
They don't own the word Eucharist.
Right.
Like when I use the word Eucharist in front of somebody and they're like, Eucharist, what are you, some kind of papist? And I'm like, Roman Catholics don't own the
Yeah.
word.
Yep.
It's kind of the it of course, this is a mindset that if you go lean too far into it, you could end up being a little bit of a jerk.
Yeah.
But also, it's kind of worth noting that they can't just take it and run with it.
Yeah.
We let them do that.
Yep.
If there's a good place for it and a place where it can be beneficial, we should seek that for
Yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah. Yep.
That also, I guess, also this plays into the idea. Hooker mentions that something that resonated with me as somebody who often personally can struggle with making executive decisions, or has before. Hopefully, I don't as much right now. What he said was, if there is something that seems slightly amiss, it's better to sometimes just to bear that, try and come up with a completely different solution that's just pulling out all the wires and reworking everything.
Yep.
We have no idea where that's going to go.
Yep.
That's pretty terrifying. And I think that is kind of a difference of mindset between the Anglican and the Reformed tradition. Is this mindset of, let's bear with what we have that might be a little amiss and try and work with it, that rather than scrapping the thing, burning the ship, and reworking with something that we have no idea, it's not tested by any history, and could very well end up leading to cataclysm.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
I mean, that goes to, I'm blanking on the name. I know it has some name, but the idea of, like, someone comes to the wall, they don't know why the wall is built. Do you just tear it down?
Chesterton's fence.
There, yeah, Chesterton's fence. Yeah.
Chesterton, love that guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
I think you see that.
Reminded me, he was Anglican and then he became Roman Catholic.
That is true. Yeah. Bummer.
But reminds me of a guy named Clive Staples Lewis who stayed Anglican all his life.
Yes. Consistently so. Like, he really, people, it's so funny. This is totally a tangent, but I was watching this Pints with Aquinas clip where they're like, oh yeah, Lewis probably would have become a Roman Catholic. And I'm like, no, like he's quoting Lewis. If you read his letters, he's like positively quoting Richard Hooker, and then like very explicit about his reasons for not becoming Roman Catholic. And he sums it up in terms of, like, you're committing me to agree to something that Rome might pronounce, like, without knowing whatever that thing is. You know? And he's like, I can never do that. I can only ever render that sort of submission to God. You know, I think that's a really interesting, and he still takes tradition as seriously as every Anglican before him had. Like, is still very much open to those to the directions of tradition. But anyway, I just thought that was a funny, like, oh, Lewis would have become a Catholic. I'm like, you wouldn't want to claim.
Who knows? Maybe when we all die, people are going to say we are going to become Roman Catholic.
Yeah, maybe. They were on their way.
Anglican Catechetical Initiative was on its way.
They're basically a bunch of papists. 20 years. I think just one quick thing on that. I mean, I think with Lewis, I think people kind of underestimate how well read he was in a lot of ways. They're like, oh, he has so much great stuff. But, if he had just read this one theologian and this one guy, he would have flipped my way.
He just read Stephen.
He just did the Narnia thing. He didn't have a full understanding.
If he had just watched my Trad Cat Zoomer-based Skibbity Riz video, non-denominational to Eastern Orthodox,
it would have been so Jover.
Instantly would have become the patriarch of Greece.
Patriarch. He would have been goated.
But it is actually, it's funny enough, I got the idea to read Hooker in the original English instead of using, again, love the guys over at Davenant. If they happen to watch this, you guys are doing great work. But I chose to go with the original actually largely because of Lewis. Convinced me that. It's because Lewis talks about how, like, reading Hooker in the original is the sort of, like, in the original, right? It's still English, but in the old, like, the older English is this kind of thing that makes you a better thinker. I mean, I've really found that to be true. Like, I like working through this. I'm like, yep, this is actually forcing my brain to. This is forcing my brain to learn.
forced to do. I remember a long ago when I first read Chesterton's Orthodoxy. That's kind of how I felt about reading G.K. Chesterton.
Yeah.
I've reread it, I think, 3 times. I love
Yeah.
that book. And it is definitely a challenge to think. Also a very delightful challenge because once you think, you also get all the jokes and it's
Yeah.
hilarious.
Yep. Yeah.
It's just kind of how it feels about Hooker. It's challenging you to think. And it's beneficial for reading other things too. Like you read or the King James Bible.
Yeah.
I do think the King James Bible, I'm on my way to being KJV only.
It's a beautiful work. It's a beautiful work.
That's great.
Work. It's very historic. And there are actually theological terms that we use now that come from the KJV.
Yep.
So know where those come from. And other things like here's your literature enthusiast coming as William Shakespeare. That always worth reading. So I don't know. I guess that's a little bit more of a rant about reading the older English than is about reading Hooker specifically.
Yeah.
But
very appreciative.
I do appreciate the original English.
Yeah. I think one advantage of reading original sources or close to original sources, obviously, like some theologians, maybe like Augustine, right? I can't read Latin, so it's like the best I can do is get a more literal translation or not a summary of the work, which is harder, right? Harder to read, and same thing with Hooker. It would be harder to read, but you're getting more of what they actually believe rather than sometimes the interpretation or the summary of someone else what they believe. And I think with figures that get claimed by so many people that it can be good to do that.
Oh yes.
So I think it's a lot because it's not their fault. I'm not like accusing them of anything. I think it's just kind of naturally like, well, this is what I think he's saying, so I'm going to put it this way. But everyone might not agree with you with that's what they're saying, right? Because I think there is an advantage to reading as original as you can in whatever the circumstance.
Yeah. I'm curious what you guys made. Logan, you had brought this up earlier, and I thought this was helpful. And I mentioned this early. It was interesting to me the strategy of conceding as much ground to the Puritans, and then like shifting to say, but they're also closer to us. What do you guys make of that as a kind of rhetorical strategy? I thought that was. I don't know if and part of the reason I ask is because as I was reading it, I was like, that like I could see why Logan, you brought up a really good reason why Hooker might do that, because if that's like if he goes to the other thing and his opponents are like, well, they're just all pagans, and they won't hear anything else, then you might say, well, even if that were the case, but yeah, I'm like, because to me, my own inclination is if we concede that ground to concede is actually just, and Hooker acknowledges this in the laws, like he acknowledges this both before Book 4 and then after Book 4 as well, that if we truly thought they were pagans, we're all screwed, because like our forefathers were in that church, like labored under it for a while. And so like if we say that they're just pagans, we are saying that the gates of hell effectively overcame the church. So I'm interested. What did you guys think of that rhetorical strategy as a whole? I'm in two minds about it.
I actually, so I don't know how much you guys would agree with me, but I actually really liked it.
Okay.
Part of the reason I really liked it was that if he had opened up, so the question is, how much should we conform to the Roman Catholic rituals?
Yeah.
Why did I blank on the word? I do not know. How much should we conform to the Roman Catholic rituals? That is the question on the table. In answering that question, if Richard Hooker were to open up immediately by saying, but the Roman Catholics aren't pagan, then that still leaves on the table the question of how much we conform to their rituals. And it almost feels like, is the question to whatever degree they aren't pagan, we shouldn't conform? What are you trying to say? That leads to an entirely different debate.
Yeah.
But if you opened up immediately by saying, you know what, guys, they're pagan, and then trying to show that from that we still don't want to reject their rituals entirely, on the basis just that they're rituals. I think that makes the argument a lot simpler from the start. It makes it much easier to say to what degree should we allow our principles to follow rituals to follow in line with their rituals.
I can see that. That's interesting. That's an interesting point.
I can kind of see what you're saying. You're kind of like just taking the question out from the very beginning. You don't have to fight them on, figuring it out. Like, well, now we have to parse out all of history to figure out the rituals that are good. I think as a argument, the thing is, I could see it today, honestly, having some use. I mean, I could imagine you were talking to someone who, I don't know, they're a Baptist or there's someone and they're like, well, Roman Catholics are heretics, right? And there's obviously those types exist, some are restorationists. I could see it being, well, you start with an argument saying, okay, well, let's assume they're pagan, right? And they're heretics or pagans, and then try to work them in a way. I could see it being like the beginning of working someone to accepting maybe that they aren't, right? It's kind of going like, well, just because you think that, there's actually still a lot of things you're wrong on. There's a lot of issues. Maybe eventually you can get them out of the kind of restorationist mindset. And of course, most of the Puritans that Richard Hooker are dealing with aren't restorationists, but I wonder, I mean, there probably was some feeling of, they could, some temptation for some to want to be that way. And I think it's an important thing to answer that if someone does assume the church fell away, basically, how do you answer that? Right? How do you answer that person?
But yeah, that's helpful.
Like apostasy.
Yeah, I mean, it's helpful because, but and there is that other part of like, man, like I just don't. That's a really difficult. At what point do you say then that the mind of the church, if you go that route with the Puritans? Now it's interesting because Cartwright seems to be contradicting himself, like because at some point, like, and if you've guys read the footnotes too, like when they're the quotations of Cartwright, like at some points Cartwright is saying like, no, like we'll follow disciplines that aren't contrary to Scripture, but then at other points he's like, but also not ones that are like too Roman Catholic. If you go that route, it starts to become difficult to know how you appropriate the consensus of the church. If it's like, well, we'll keep some disciplines, but not all of them, even though these ones don't contradict the word of God. That's like a very, like at that point, I don't even know how one has a coherent epistemology for appropriating church tradition. But I'm curious if you guys got that impression from Cartwright as well.
What writing of Cartwright specifically is you responding to? Because I'm definitely not so familiar with Cartwright.
Yeah. So, oh man, it's been a little bit, but I think Cartwright's interaction with John Whitgift, the Archbishop. So like they had a back and forth, and it's his sort of, it's the thing that Whitgift is responding to. Like they have their correspondence that gets published. Hooker then takes that up too, and defends Whitgift. Like the Laws is written in part to defend some of the preliminary principles Whitgift lays out. Yeah. I forget what the work is specifically called. I'd actually have to look that up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. There was an interesting point at some point, and I think it kind of goes to Hooker's point where you kind of see them. I see some Puritans accept practices that the Romans do, that the Roman Church does, but then they'll say that we shouldn't accept any popish practices, or there's practices that the Church in the East do, but we shouldn't accept all the things that the Eastern Church does. I think he talked about the feast with Easter and all that. So, I think there is kind of within the Puritans. I think what you were asking, there is kind of this jumping off of like, well, we'll take some things that we think are right from the Romans, but we'll say that this was the original, and then some things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think there is kind of this like, I don't know. It's very subjective.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
I think it kind of goes to even like the Geneva Gowns point, right?
Yeah.
That he makes. There's a lot of subjectivity to this. It's like, is there really any fact or any good reason to do all this?
Yep.
Yeah.
Not really. I think unfortunately it is kind of like some things feel popish.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like no popery when we see it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's kind of where it ends.
And the irony is that to some, the Puritans seem too popish. It's like, again, it's very subjective. It's dependent on your subject, your point of observation.
Yeah.
To us in our modern American mainstream context, sometimes we look at Puritans, or modern American mainstreams look at Puritans and say, oh my gosh, look at these semi-papists. Oh my
God. Like the conformists.
Yeah.
The non-conformists were saying the conformist Puritans were too papist.
You could go down the line. This plays into what C.S. Lewis wrote in his preface to St. Athanasius of Alexandria. He says, you'll see mere Christianity everywhere. And once you start seeing it, you'll realize, what did he say? That the Puritans seem almost papist or something.
Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of because
of the
Roman Catholics, I guess, are kind of Christians. So you're going to see similarities.
Yep. Well, and I thought it was so interesting. Like, I thought one of his strongest points in this book really was like the, Puritans can't escape this, because if they're meeting in church buildings, that is not something that like was taught in Scripture, or in the early church, they're meeting in like underground houses, or like you can still go to some of them in Rome, right, where it's like really, really bare bones, like today, like these house churches that they would have used, that the new churches are built over, new, quote unquote, like 5th, 6th, 7th, whatever. Like you can go down to that basement and like find this whole world right from the 1st century, and there's just, it's so stripped down. So like, when the Puritans or Presbyterians today like erect buildings, they're not like, where did they get that from? Well, they got that from the past 1,000 years of practice, like 1,000/several hundred years of practice. And so I thought that was a really powerful point of like, the moment you start doing that, then you really don't have any consistent criteria for saying we need to keep this and not this, other than you're just burying the fact that you like this. They like the Geneva gown, but the Scripture doesn't say to have a gown. So like, why are you using clerical robes at all? Where are they getting that from? I thought that was a really powerful point.
Yeah, there's like obviously I would say they hold to everything must be found in Scripture, like the regulative principle, but there's just, without them even, I guess I would say probably in most cases not even fully realizing it, they're bringing in things that to them just seem, I guess, natural, right? Like, like how could he not have a church building? Of course they're going to have a church building, but that is something you're bringing in, and it's actually not something they could technically prove. I mean, I do kind of wonder how a Puritan would actually answer that response. If someone's like, "Hey, where's a church building in a Bible? I don't see no church building in a Bible." How do you? I'm not sure how they could answer that other than it's good order.
Maybe you could draw out like perhaps some kind of typology from having a temple building, or having some kind of Jewish temples, but like even that is you'd have to call that to some degree a development of doctrine in some way.
Yep. Well, and then there becomes
definitely not explicit.
Well, and then there becomes the real question of why the typology between the temple and not priestly vestments. Like why do you stop the typology there if one goes that route? Which is fine, they can. Anglicans have no problem going that route. But then why not? Especially because we're told in Malachi, right, that the nations that are then brought into Israel offer sacrifice in all places. and the fathers all interpret that in terms of the Eucharist. It's like why would we stop the typology at these parts?
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, there's no good reason. I mean, that's kind of the issue
Yeah.
I think you would run into. It was really funny. I remember it was in one of the other like Anglican discords. They posted something of an IFB pastor, and he was going on and on about traditions. Right? We have traditions; they're not in the Bible. Don't tell me where is that in the Bible. And it's funny because it's like, I mean, in a lot of ways he's right. Like I'm not going to criticize him. There is traditions, right? There's things not in the Bible, but how can you stop where you stop? Right? It
Right.
doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah, it becomes just arbitrary. Like
Mhm.
who told you to wear a good suit to the pulpit?
No.
They're going to
Right.
make sort of extrapolations from natural law about what aids the so I was reading Cartwright like 6 months ago or so, and like part of Cartwright's rationale, because he addresses the building thing, and he's like, he does go to like the good order thing. He's like, well, it's good order to help us. Scripture says that we should meet together, so it sanctions that. A building helps facilitate that command. But then, like, the moment you go there, that's actually the point of the liturgy.
Yeah.
Like, we're
Yeah.
not just doing random stuff.
Yeah.
Like, we're actually trying to facilitate real scriptural elements here.
I think his answer is summatively, I'll tell you why. I don't know. How did you get this done?
Yep. Yeah.
That's Fiddler on the Roof, in case you don't know. That's what I'm quoting.
Yeah. But I mean that idea, and in principle, I'm like, okay, great, yeah. So facilitates being able to enact scripture. Okay, great. That's actually what the liturgy is for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
it's kind of the point of
Yeah.
what Hooker says kind of in all of his book, is that the Puritans are logically incoherent.
Yep.
So it's not too surprising that that's what he's pointing out now.
Yeah. Yep. I thought his point at the very beginning, and this was like, because I tend to go to systematics because that's just where I live. Like at the very beginning, where he talks about God instituting, God's pattern being the institution of physical things to sort of, in a lively way, represent the word spoken. That's such an interesting principle. And I think that has, I'm curious what you guys think. I think there's actually like in book 1, you have already there like a kind of principle for a sacramental theology. I think you could take book 1 and this part, like the first chapter or 2 of book 4, and then use those to start to build like an Anglican sacramental theology of the word. Like one that centers, yes, heavenly participation, but the cornerstone of Anglican sacramental theology being that things participate in the divine speech. Yes, they participate in the divine excellencies, of course, by way of divine self-communication. I think I think that's latent in Hooker, but I'm curious if you guys see that too, or I could be reading Edwards into Hooker. But I will never not be influenced by John.
The guy's a legend. Jonathan Edwards, legend.
Yeah. But I'm curious if you guys thought that too. I thought that was such an interesting, that was just highly suggestive towards like almost a communicative vision of reality.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Go ahead.
No, I was just asking a question. You Logan.
It's something I've been thinking about more recently as well, because we read that book, I don't know, like 2 months ago, right? Or some time ago, and the idea of
Memories.
kind of nature having a sacramental almost aspect, or God being in all nature, ordering all things and getting things right. And funny enough, that's something that my priest and rector of my church has been doing. They've been preaching about last like 5 weeks about how sacramental tons of different things are, like the children in your life, the random people you meet, everything has a purpose by God as a sacrament, right? They might not be like the thing you go to the altar for, but there's a sacramental nature in that. And I know in my case, my priests are very they love Richard Hooker, right? I've heard him quote Richard Hooker. I've heard him say, well, Richard Hooker suggests that the way of life is this, or the ordering of nature is this way. So I think that is fair to say for Richard Hooker, that Richard Hooker is kind of giving a sacramental Anglican way.
Yeah.
I think obviously I haven't read all of the early Anglicans. One day I maybe can say I have, but I do think Richard Hooker, from at least what I've read, I wouldn't be surprised if Richard Hooker laid out what we think of like maybe just normal modern Anglican sacramental views of life. I do think that comes from book 1 and the beginning of this book.
Yeah. Go for it, JT.
Kind of plays into what I think of as during the prayer of consecration.
Yep.
Like, under thy Christ, make all things subject.
Yep.
That it sounds a lot like what Richard Hooker says in book 1 is that the goal of all things is to be subject under Christ. That's the law under which things operate is the law of subjection to Christ. And that's what it's a result of Christ being king of the universe. Is that the law of everything is subjection under him. Appropriate for today, because today's the Epiphany of our Lord. Recognizing his lordship.
That's great. And I think that the thing I appreciate about the sort of directionality of the subjection of heaven and earth to Christ, like, is the pairing of a theology of the word with that. Because, like, I think my lights, what different, it's not like Roman Catholics just utterly ignore this, but like I do think with Anglicanism, right, and with Lutheranism to some extent as well, you get the sort of recovery of that idea that, well, what is it that makes baptism? It's the word plus the water, the word hallowing the water, and you sort of get away from all of the discussions of physical causality and all of that stuff that's like going on in the scholastics, where like the debates are like, does the water itself have an endowed power to like regenerate you? And like Anglicans are just like, this, no, like we're not doing that. It's the word plus the water. I wonder if one of the differences between a kind of a coherent Anglican sacramental theology is the centralization of a theology of the word, where yes, of course, like things facilitate participation in the divine nature, but that happens through hearing the divine speech in and through everything. Like I think of Psalm 19 of the heavens are declaring the glory of God, like the heavens are preaching. So yes, participating, but they're also participating in a particular way by like preaching to us, and they're communicating God's own self-communication to us. And I wonder if when Hooker talks about material things being lively illustrations of words, that sort of connects Anglican sacramental theology to a theology of the word more so, even though it wouldn't necessarily contradict Roman Catholic theology, but it would sort of emphasize the theology of the word a little bit more.
So where specifically in book 4 do you see this the most?
Yeah. So particularly in chapters 1 and 2, when he talks about like he's going through those different examples, and he talks about like for instance, the slave and the all, right? Like when the slave declares in Exodus that they want to stay with their master's family the rest of their lives, the all driven through their ear is the signpost of that. And for Hooker, he like in chapter 1 and 2 is explicitly like, and that's because that physical sign communicates that desire. And that's that to me, and then like that's part of his defense of ceremonies in general, that God not only gives us words but communicates those words through matter. Which I like. That's just it's a lovely.
I think it's beautiful. I think it's also so human. It's just their tendency to love words and to love physical matter. Maybe I say this as a poet, but that's just kind of how I see us as humans, is that we have, distinct from irrational animals, we have this particular obsession with physical matter and with words when they really mean something. we don't see animals being so obsessed about a rose that somebody gave us.
Yeah.
Or about a letter that we received from somebody special.
Yeah.
Or about something sweet that somebody said to us today. But we see humans doing that all the time. And I think that's a particular example of the divine image within us, is that we're sentimental creatures. And we're communicative creatures. We use words. There's something inherently supernatural about words. You don't think that words and language should be part of the natural order. It's one of the hardest things for atheists to explain is language.
Yep.
Because language really isn't part of the natural order. It's an expression of God superseding in some sense.
Yep. It's like chock full of teleology language.
Yeah.
It's like
teleology. It's teleology like in the flesh.
Yeah, that's cool. Oh, that's a lovely way to, man, I'm gonna remember that. Yeah, that's a beautiful phrase. Yes. Language is teleology in the flesh. You gotta write that down. Let's
put that
yeah.
Is it t-shirt worthy?
Yeah. That's great. I'm gonna jot that down in the Discord. That's so great. Yeah. Yep.
Maybe put it to a poem. You have my permission to put that into a poem or something. I don't do it first.
That's so good. I'll always quote you for that. I don't think that's like one of those quotes that I'm
like, wow, that honors me.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah. Huh. But yeah, I'm curious, like, how does that interact with the way you guys are thinking about liturgy? Because to my mind, it's like when I see incense, like the thing for me that shifted, like when I was a Reformed Baptist and then I became like an Anglican, the thing that actually, like, it's funny because as soon as someone asked me the question, like, because I was like, oh, incense, like that's kind of strange. I wasn't like one of the Reformed Baptists that like ever had a huge aversion. Like I was kind of a London Baptist guy, so I didn't like have a huge aversion to sacramental stuff. But like there was the thurifer. When I first saw the thurifer, I was like, I don't know what to do with it. But as soon as someone asked me the question, well, okay, this is rooted in scripture. What do you think it is? I was like, oh, wait a second. Like just the instant connection between, oh yeah, that revelation, like the prayers of the saints rising to God. Like, okay, yeah, all this makes a lot of sense. For me, my experience when I read that in Hooker, I was like, that's definitely been my experience of the liturgy. I'm curious for you guys, but I don't know if it is for everyone. Like, I do think there are people who like go to the liturgy and like they see incense and they're like, wow, I really like incense. Incense feels mystical and cool. I think this might be mean. I think cleave to antiquities. but and I get it. Like, I think there are probably people who could not tell you where the incense is coming from in scripture. But I'm curious for you guys, like, has that, the way Hooker is describing like ceremonies being this sort of sensible like embodiment, like the language taking on flesh, right? Like the sensible embodiment of like words. How does that match your guys' experience of the liturgy?
Actually, I would say even to that point of the person who doesn't see it, I feel like the act of having it or having this ceremony, in a sense, can put your mind into something or make you think something is going on. You'll kind of get an idea of something. There's something going on. Now, the incense might be cool and awesome, but there is something going on. There is something intrinsic, I think, where you go, there is something happening there. Like they're swinging it with them when they come down in the center. They swing it behind the gospel. There is something going on there, even if you don't fully know why it's going on. Even when it comes to like bowing, right?
Yeah.
Maybe someone can tell you exactly why they bow, right?
Yeah.
But you do gain something from bowing, even if you do it without knowing, because I'm bowing. This signifies something. I might not know it.
Yeah.
Right. But it is doing something. And I think even if someone showed up and didn't know and did those things, they would maybe in a sense gain benefit and understand at least in the right direction of what's going on.
That's a very good point. Like it sort of creates creates the category to like, even if they don't fully understand the category, it's doing something in their imagination that's preparing their mind and heart for it.
I've thought this way when I've listened to like worship music, Gregorian chant or something. I think the first time I really thought about this was when I was listening to the Mass in B minor by J.S. Bach. And I remember thinking at some point, these are words that maybe I don't entirely understand. It's in Latin, but I know this is the Nicene Creed. I know this is the Christian message being said here. So there's even if I don't understand the words specifically, there is a value to it, a spiritual value that's being communicated here.
And,
of course, knowing the words is important. There's a reason our liturgy is English, but there's some way in which, I guess you could say it's similar to knowing why we have the liturgy the way it is also important. It's nice to know, like, why do we bow? Why do we have incense? But it's also, there is kind of an inherent spiritual value in that, even if you don't entirely know.
No, that's helpful. It actually reminds me a little bit of are you guys familiar with Jean-Luc Marion? So he's a philosopher, like Roman Catholic, but
I think you referenced him in your recent video, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Well, yeah, I've been reading.
I remember thinking, oh yeah, another guy with a Luke name.
I know. Everyone's they're like, oh, I texted like my small group. I was like, this quote from Jean-Luc Marion, and they're like, oh, we see you, Sean. Yeah,
one letter different.
Yeah. But the Jean-Luc Marion, in both his books, In Excess and then Revelation is from Elsewhere, he taught at University of Chicago. I think he's still alive. He's emeritus at University of Chicago. He talks about what's called the saturated phenomenon, where, like, let's say you're looking at a tree, the tree impresses itself into like the phenomenological field, but like when it does that, there's this sense that there's a moreness to the tree than what you can see. Like when it and it stirs you to want to know more about it, right? And I wonder then if one might also say, yes, so liturgy has a value, of course, in pairing with the word, and it also has a value in terms of stirring this intuition of excess, which then draws you to press ever deeper, maybe, into the word.
It plays into what you said about falling in love. I had a poem once where I talked about falling in love with somebody was like reading a sonnet. Falling in love with somebody you had known for a very long time is like reading a sonnet that you've before quickly skimmed a few times. One day came to and decided to read closely and realize the amazing beauty that was there. There's something hidden below the surface that you've never seen, and at once, when revealed, brings forth love. I think it's similar to liturgy and kind of the, dare I be that guy who says it's great because it's old. If there's something to the fact that it's old, it has a moreness to it. It gains so much. There are so many other people before me who have come to this liturgy and interacted with it. If this liturgy could speak, it tells so many stories. I think that's a very powerful thought.
It actually reminds me a lot of C.S. Lewis. So good job for you echoing. So Lewis, in that, there's a volume of essays called God on the Dock, and in that volume, there's this essay on why read old books. And for Lewis, he actually his argument is it's not that something is necessarily good because it's old, but it's that if it's old and if it's a classic, that means it's had time to be tested over time. And it's still, by every generation, reaffirmed and reaffirmed and reaffirmed. And that sort of reminds me of why is it that the ancient liturgy, the Sorum Rite, was carried over into the Book of Common Prayer, and then we still use the Book of Common Prayer? Well, it's a way of reaffirming those treasures and putting them to practice in the life of the people of God, like generation after generation, which tells you that there's a depth that's there, that these generations have been seeing. Otherwise, probably it would have gone to the dustbin of history.
Yes.
Yeah, I think think about that. I think you have someone initially come in and they can feel it in a sense. But think about this: people who, for many people, they could have been 60 years same liturgy,
Yeah.
and I think that goes to a point where the word comes in, like you're discussing, Sean, where it's like, you know, early on, maybe it's, you know, the incense is nice and cool, and it these makes me feel something, or makes me puts me in the right direction. But there's also that experience of over time, you know, you've gone to 100, 200, 1,000 of these liturgies where there is that element of, well, now I can you know, think about revelation through the incense. There's a deeper level there where
Mhm.
the person who walks in the door for the first time can feel it and experience the deeper level, and the person 1,000 times can think about the deeper level and
Yeah.
have, you know, also
Mhm.
they both attend the same liturgy together. It's not like a something where, you know, they both one person hates the liturgy and the other person likes it because you went through it long enough. You know,
Yeah.
so I think that is the beautiful thing about a lot of these liturgies that have tested the time, right? And I think that's partly of it. You know, these liturgies do, for the new and the old, bring contemplation and um, I don't know.
I wonder if it's almost like a fulfillment of Christ's prophecy that the rocks will cry out.
Interesting. How
Mhm.
so?
It's like that which does not seem to have a word, the order of liturgy, the incense burning, the bowing, these things which do not
Mm.
explicitly speak, they still cry out. Um,
Interesting. Huh.
I've thought about this on a literal level in terms of the pipe organ,
Hmm.
the rocks crying out.
Yeah.
Then I guess you could think about that in terms of a lot of things, like
Yeah.
the general church buildings. Chesterton talks about the gargoyles on the buildings being formed out of the mouth of Christ by those words that the rocks will cry out. The unintelligible will become intelligible because
Mm.
the ancient, just kind of the way in which we as beings who are so obsessed with intelligibility will gravitate towards certain things.
Hmm.
Meaning will form around those things.
Interesting. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, viewing sort of the liturgy as a meaning-making context that sort in which those actions kind of take on the almost character of language. Like it
Mhm,
almost gives audible, sensible expression to what they're saying.
mhm.
Yeah, that's a really interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's cool. That's really interesting.
I've definitely thought about that in terms of
Yeah,
music, how music brings to us meaning in ways that
yeah, yeah,
transcend word.
yeah. It's interesting. Well, that leads me to the last sort of set of questions. I want to try to do this exercise because, it's catechetical initiatives. As we're thinking about teaching these things, how does the theology? And I'm leaning into the. If you guys want to have other aspects, you're like,
Mhm.
I kind of want to workshop how I would teach this as well. Feel free to. My mind is like, oh, the theology of the word. Like that's just so interesting to me. But how would you guys? Let's so sort of if I'm thinking about two sort of main topics, you can go with either one, whatever one you think would be helpful in your context. Teach. Let's say you're teaching like adult confirmation or whatever, or you're teaching youth confirmation, like whatever one that the Lord has you in right now. How would you take Hooker and then use stuff from Book 4 to make liturgy and ceremonies more intelligible to whatever group you can pick it, whether adult or youth?
Probably a lot of already what we've been talking about is that this is ancient and preferred by the ancient church, and we as humans we naturally assign meaning to things, and that's not a natural tendency to be avoided. That's actually can be a very good natural tendency.
Mm.
I mean, we have like, for instance, in our culture, we have National Day of Popcorn, we have National Cookie
Mhm.
Day, and National Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Yeah.
Pretty sure it's sometime in September.
Yeah.
Yeah, happens to be something I keep track of. Um, it's just natural for us to want to
Yeah.
assign to things, and when we've seen such benefit from our natural tendency to assigning meaning to things, that shouldn't be a tendency that we should resist.
Yeah.
So maybe I could condense that talk to be a little less like over the heads of the majority of the people who are listening, or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't actually be over their heads. Maybe they'd like it. I'm not sure. Might depend on my context. But that's probably where I'd gravitate towards, is that the liturgy is a good response to a good and natural tendency among us as creatures created in God's image.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Also, in terms of that natural tendency towards us as humans to find meaning in things and to formulate things of meaning, we're always going to have liturgies.
Yeah.
That's something worth
Yep.
noting. Even in the most unliturgical contexts, you still have an order to things. You still
Yep.
have liturgy.
Yeah. James K. Smith.
Yeah.
So I remember what I think of is when Dr. Cooper was talking about, Dr. Jordan Cooper was talking about his days in punk rock.
Oh yeah.
That was one of the most entertaining things ever, honestly. Like Dr. Cooper explaining about his days in punk rock. Love that guy.
Total tangent. His yo-yo video, like completely
the yo-yo video, legendary.
Like 12 or 14 years ago, and I'm like, wait a second.
The man's a legend. The man's awesome. Forget about this theology stuff. This guy's
Yeah. Anyway, sorry. That's
I am the king of tangents.
Very worthy.
Yep. I love my opposite over Jason.
Yeah.
So you got it. He was talking about his days in punk rock and like how at some point you end up getting an order for the people that are all about abolishing the order. And that's what we see continuously. That's what we see in church history, is the people who are all about abolishing the order end up developing an order because we're orderly beings. We like order. You see people who come in with like postmodern artwork and they want to abolish the order. And what do? They develop an order of postmodernism. It's postmodern. And yeah, it's order just kind of, I guess it plays into the idea of law that we perceive law, and law is just a natural. I almost wonder if it plays into the idea of like there's a privation of evil, as evil is a privation of good. In a way, you could say disorder is a privation of order. And anytime you try and create a system of disorder, it's just like you can never have pure evil. You can never have pure disorder. And all disorder is a corruption of order, in the same way that all evil is a corruption of good. And wherever there's disorder, there's going to be some kind of order. The disorder is just a corruption.
Yeah, I think that's right, because it couldn't be recognized as disorder unless there were a prior norm of order against which we're recognizing it. Yeah. Well, and that reminds me quite a bit of Book 1. Where Hooker, it's just like law is basically just the reification of order. Order and pattern.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess thinking about it, I'm not sure how it is in a lot of ACNA churches. I mean, I kind of got the feel that there is a lot of lower church or Baptist people who are coming to Anglicanism. At least in the parish, it's funny, when I first went, I thought I was expecting like half the people to be from the Episcopal Church, and 90% of them are from Baptist or non-denom, right?
Yeah.
I'm one. And that's great. And I think this is actually something where Hooker, especially in this book, is relevant, talking about certain of these practices. I mean, I've noticed that, and I've talked to some people, I know most of them would come in where they had asked the priest questions about why do you use incense, right? Or do some of these things look very Romish or very Catholic in a way? Why are these things used? I think having a justification for the order and for the ceremonies would be important for like adult confirmations. And because in some ways you have to justify, well, why this and not Roman Catholic? I hate to say that, but but
Yeah.
like why are these practices good and useful, and why do Anglicans maintain these practices? In addition, there are some people I've seen, some people who join, not in my parish, I'm not accusing anyone of that in my parish, but I've seen it's mainly been online, who are Anglican, but they want to remain what they were before, kind of what they were before, but with bishops, right? So maybe they'll just be a Baptist with bishops or something. And I think in those cases, I mean, I think that is where using Richard Hooker's arguments for the orders of ceremonies, I mean, I think that's probably the most important step right now for the ACNA. Is that there's so many people who are coming with these exact questions that he's answering, about why do we do these practices? These practices look Roman, but I'm interested, right? So, and so I guess, I mean, probably not a great answer, but I guess it's what I'm jumping to is that I think if I were to teach a class on confirmation, I would probably be quoting Richard Hooker. I'd be like, the reason for I would try and give them the actual reasons for ceremonies from Richard Hooker. I don't think I would go anywhere else.
I think one thing we mentioned Scripture, like Scripture talks about the incense. I also think of Scripture talking about the songs of angels, like when you sing the Sanctus, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty. That's, I think you could, in some way, it's not overly poetic to say that that's literally the words of angels in heaven right now.
Yeah.
So we're literally joining the angels when we chant that part of the liturgy.
Yep. Yeah. It's story.
And well, I think that's the great thing the liturgy does is I'm not 100% sure about others, but I know in the 1928 it literally mentions the angels. Going into it, I'm sure the 2019.
Yeah. I think both 1662 and 2019. I know in the morning prayer talks, it has the Te Laudus.
Oh, I love the Te Deum. Yeah, it's so good.
That's great. It's awesome. I love being at home alone when I can pray it, so I can shout the holy, holy.
Yeah. So good. Yeah.
It is something I'm thinking through. I mean, a lot of ways, I think it depends on the confirmands that you're dealing with as a whole, as your parish. But I think at this point, the ceremonies is one of the biggest questions for a lot of people. Like, why do these things?
Do you encounter many people? It's less like they're Baptists who want bishops, and more like they're Baptists who want, I don't know, the smells and the bells.
Yeah.
Kind of just like
a
little add-on. And I don't know. There's like this Richard Hooker guy from about a few hundred years ago who's kind of, but all right. And something about, I don't know, King Henry VIII.
Yeah. Yeah. In my experience, so truth be told, here right now, I'm recording from an office at Church of the Resurrection here. So at Res in Wheaton, right? I would say most parishioners I meet, honestly, are not theologically Anglican. They are very appreciative of the liturgy. A lot of them are just Baptists, but are very appreciative of like liturgy. Like almost London Baptist type people. But they don't know. They have no idea what the London
Baptists who baptize babies and have bishops, which ironically means that you're no longer Baptist, but okay.
Yeah. But it's funny. I have a lot of friends here that actually take Gavin's view on Baptist, which is so funny. Of like, it's valid but not ideal, and they don't want to do it for their kids. There are actually several friends of mine in my small group actually that take that view. So yeah, I think that's right. I do think a lot of people come because and it doesn't, Logan, what you said is actually very helpful correct, because I think my initial impulse would have been like, oh man, like I really wish they understood like what was being said in the liturgy. But like, it's also not a bad thing that they're perceiving excess that's like calling upon them to press into deeper. Like that's actually
Mhm.
not necessarily
Yeah.
a bad thing. So that was actually really helpful for me. Like, yeah,
I think to some degree that perception of excess that creates in itself a hunger
yeah,
to learn.
yep,
That's kind of what happened to me. I would start going to an Anglican church, and it was a little bit like I was happy with knowing that I could be not so theologically Anglican mainstream and still be going there. And then at some point, I get tugged into the Anglican theological mainstream because of that liturgy and because of
yeah,
that learn more.
yep, yep,
Yeah.
So
I mean,
possible.
ironically, part of one of the reasons I first hopped into an Anglican church was I was like, well, I can jump into this. They're only going to ask me to commit to the basics. Like they're not going to demand me to do anything crazy, right?
No
I don't have to
merry-go-round.
go, yeah, I have to go to the East thing, so around the East. And then as I was in it, I was like, oh, I think they're just I think they're actually just correct on the doctrine.
yeah,
You're actually right. Oh my god. I found
Yeah.
people were right. Good gracious.
You
yep,
know,
Didn't
so
think that was gonna happen.
I do think there is some element of that within Anglicanism, but
yeah.
yeah,
I think that's
obviously,
actually largely true for me too. Like to some extent, like I was a Reformed Baptist when I started coming here, but then yeah, there was a sense in which the liturgy just kind of works on you over time. Yeah, that's just interesting.
I want to say I'm blessed to have great priests and deacons at my church. So some of that comes from them. That's not all from me.
Yeah.
Some of that, but they do a great job.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I I do think going to your point, I don't think that's definitely. I think that's not unique with your church, Sean, with
Yeah.
and the ACNA currently, and I think that's just a tough point because it's more of a coalition at this point
Yep.
than anything.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I do think there's a real opportunity there, and that's why I got to plug this the
Yeah.
initiative. And I think Richard Hooker is a benefit. I feel like if I could, I doubt this would ever work. If I was like in charge, you're in charge of all confirmands, what they have to do, I'd be like, you're gonna have to go over Richard Hooker.
I definitely am one. Yeah, I mean, because this is so. I seriously like these meetings with you guys have been like amazing. Like it's been very helpful because I read the
definitely.
laws like a year and a half
Mhm.
ago or so, and like to read. I'm like, there's so much here where you actually learn fundamental Anglican principles by just
Mhm.
reading the laws of ecclesiastical polity. You know?
Yeah.
By reading it carefully, you learn so much about the thinking that went into like the liturgy and the theology of natural law that undergirds like our sacramental theology and how we're thinking about the church as a kind of political society, a Catholic political society. You know, like
Yeah.
it's there's so much that's there in Hooker, which is just
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
Surprisingly enough, Anglicans aren't all just people who follow the wiles of Saint Henry VIII.
Right. Yeah. Shocker. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That works. Well, yeah. Go for it.
I was just gonna say. I mean, at that point, I think, and with the older sources, older Anglican theologians, I mean, there's something. I think that you actually get true. I don't know. I feel bad saying true Anglicanism, but I think there is an issue in the modern day where people always want to appeal to something outside Anglicanism for their doctrine. Like, oh, well, I'm Anglo-Catholic, so I'll just read the Catechism of the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Or
Gosh.
or I'm Baptist, so I'm gonna just like listen to. And I don't want to call anyone out, but I'm just gonna listen to whoever and take all their opinions.
Yep.
I mean, we did mention Gavin earlier, but we love that guy. So
yeah. I don't want to hit on Gavin, so I'm not gonna just yeah. But the thing is, I think there is a lack of looking at any ancient sources. I think that's probably true for most people. It's probably not an Anglican thing. It's probably just a modern church thing.
Was it? I'm sorry, this might be a little bit of a divergence, but was it in this book where he responds to John Calvin on baptism? I think it was a while. It might have been book 3.
I think it might have been book 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly.
Yep. Yeah, I think it was book 3 where he dresses the like grandfather argument.
There was kind of my one of my oh my gosh, that's actually this guy's actually right moments.
Yeah.
When I heard Dr. Gavin Ortland responding to views on infant baptism,
Yep.
and he mentioned Richard Hooker's view. I remember hearing his response to Richard Hooker's view and thinking, actually a pretty decent response by Hooker, honestly.
It is. Yeah, it totally is. Like,
pretty commonsensical.
You know what's wild about that too? I found out later on, actually, that in reading Richard Field, that Field then makes that case. Because, like, so I read Hooker, and when I initially responded to Gavin on that, I'm like, okay, well, Hooker at least thinks that, like, children are included in the faith of their parents. Like, that's very sensible. You know, that seems to me sensible anyway. But then I found out, and like, he was kind of like, to him that sounded like a newish argument. And I get that to like a reformed, like to a former Presbyterian. I know how that would sound like a newish argument. But then I read that in Richard Field the other day, actually, funny enough, that Field and of the church is like, yeah, we baptize babies because babies are included in the faith of their parents. And this explains the custom of like having parents answer for their kids and things like that. Which was, I was like, wow, that's very pleasant. I'm very pleasantly surprised. Yeah.
Anyway. How does Richard Field compare to Hooker in the timeline?
Yeah, so Field is writing a little bit after Hooker. So Hooker lays the ground, I think, for like a kind of Anglican approach to tradition. I think I uploaded the paper I wrote in the Discord. I tried to trace that out there. And I'm trying to put that into a YouTube video because that paper is 40 pages. So, like, not accessible.
One of my short stories.
Well, I mean, which are going to be more interesting. This is like 40 pages going back and forth with like everyone and their mother in academia.
Quote Yoda, page turners they were not.
But Field, I think, basically carries forth Hooker's principles and like then starts to pretty rigorously apply them. So he's definitely downstream of Hooker, but in a way that, like, when you read Field and his approach to like general councils and things, it's like, oh man, like everyone after Hooker is basically using the argument that Hooker lays out in like book 1 and book 4, and then as we'll see in book 7 in his defense of the episcopate, like everyone downstream of him is like, oh yeah, and the consent of men is the greatest token to the good, and it's like, oh yeah, this, like when you're reading it, you're like, this is totally from Hooker, you know.
They all got hooked.
Yeah. So in any case, he's downstream of Hooker, and yeah, you can tell it in like the divines of the 17th. Now, the divines of the 17th century basically all go to de jure divino episcopacy. I think I know why. Because I think the argument Hooker lays out for it, I'm like, when I read that, and then when you read book 7 too, you kind of like, it leaves you almost scratching your head of like, I think he's basically saying it without saying it. It's like very hard not to go that way with given his principles of like, I get you can say like it's not part of the matter of divine revelation, like fine, like that's consistent, but like Hooker, and maybe that's what he means by it's not de jure divino, so like I guess, but like once you say that the consent of men in natural law is as the sentence of God, because natural law itself is authored by God and all this stuff, and then you apply that to the episcopacy, it's like really hard to not say that, like on some level, it's not a divine command. You know, you might not say it's divine revelation, which is fine, but like, you know, it's very hard to not say. And then, of course, then Bilson does think it's part of the revelation, and a lot of the Anglicans of the 17th century do. But like, basically, everyone is like, yeah, this is what God wants the church to do everywhere. You know, in the 17th century.
Yeah, it's interesting because yeah, I mean, it's just, you would think Hooker basically would have to agree to that. I mean, if you ask like, the entire church had the episcopate. Okay, so should the Continental Reformed people have bishops? I mean, he probably would have to say, well, yeah, they should have bishops. You know?
And I get it. I think he doesn't say that because he doesn't want to, like, his target is the Puritans, and he doesn't want to bite the Continental Reformation. Like, but I'm like, I feel like it seems like you inevitably kind of have to go there.
I guess to be fair to him, I think for him, he was still trying to keep the Church of England together. I guess in his mind, there was still like you can reconcile these things. We can still come together. We can have an agreement on this.
Yep.
And I would guess the later guys are like, "There's no agreement." I mean, obviously, it gets very severe later.
Yep.
But
and to be fair to him, it's also not as though like the continental Reformed churches like rebelled against it. Like Geneva took the order it did because the bishop basically fled.
That's just what happened.
Yeah. And then, of course, in some Lutheran areas they retained it, and then in other Lutheran areas it was the same deal. The bishop, there was an absentee bishop anyway, and so it just never came back. Yeah. So, I mean, to his credit, it's like there's less rebellion there, but like at the same time, I'm like, I do think the principles carried to their consistent point lead you to the 17th century, where then the Anglicans are like, no, everyone really should be doing this.
Well, I guess you can see some of it because even with like Davenant, right? Like,
yeah, that's right.
So he still holds on to like, well, we can make some room for the continental Reformed and Lutherans because of the issues.
And bishops with them, and
How do you feel like if you were running a catechesis class full of a lot of Baptists who were who likes the liturgy, and I guess bishop is just kind of a cool side product, how would you address the notion of Hooker's ecclesiology and the insistence on the episcopate?
No, that's great.
I could understand where that might sound a little harsh to a lot of non-denominationals who just like liturgy.
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, funny enough, just had this conversation with my two older brothers. So the way I approached that was actually directly by resourcing Hooker's, actually like his claim from book 1, and then book 1 and book. What does he say? It's like book 1. I think book 1 and book 2. I need to go back and watch our videos on this. But where Hooker claims that the church is a political society. And in book 1, he like quotes Aristotle, and I think rightly, where like any sort of visible society is ordered by its constitutional form. So the way to answer your question, JT, the way I explain this to my brothers is by saying like, look, if England got rid of its monarchy, it would essentially cease to be that country that existed in the 10th century. It would effectively be a different country for all intents and purposes. Most of us agree on that, it seems. That's why British people, a lot of them, even though they have like no historic attachment, a lot of them feel strongly about like, I kind of want to keep the hereditary monarchy because they feel like their national identity, even though like they don't believe any of the premises anymore. Like they still feel like this attachment to it because they feel British identity is like somehow bound up with it. And I think that's actually right. Like, I think they should. So if that's the case, if Aristotle is right, and I think he is, that a political society persists by its constitutional form, then the society of the church, if it's a political society, right, has to have a constitutional form by which it persists through time. And that's again, like, that's just right. That's book 1 of the laws, right?
Yeah.
And so if that's the case, it has to have a constitutional form. Then we ask what that is. And history gives one answer, like, and it's the episcopate. Like that is like, it's very rare you get one answer to a question.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about this is I think it's also this is actually a good reason why we're not Roman Catholic and Bishop of Rome. Is because if we look at church history, what we don't get is that the constitutional form must be under a bishop of Rome. I often, with my Roman Catholic friends, when I'm in debates, sometimes one of the misunderstandings and the mindset that he might be assuming onto it is that there must be a constitutional form under one bishop or something like that. And that like Anglicans are crazy because now they're not even under the Archbishop of Canterbury anymore. And it's like, but that's my argument in response to that would be that was never the claim about the constitutional form of the church, that we're under one bishop.
Right.
And so that kind of constitutional form argument is what we use to justify why we're not currently under the Bishop of Rome,
Yep.
it could make sense why that's also the argument we use to justify why we're under bishops in general, though, because that's the that's what you see in the church history.
Yep. And to some level, Rome has to concede, like on some level, I would argue Rome has to concede it because they recognize the Eastern Orthodox, the Oriental Orthodox. They recognize the Assyrian Church of the East, which is technically Nestorian. Well, at least once upon a time was Nestorian. They recognize those as valid churches. And so on some level then, when we're thinking about what constitutes the society of the church, even if they want to say like, well, everyone should be under the Bishop of Rome, nevertheless, if it's a true church, then what's essential to the constitutional form of the church is the episcopate, not union with the Bishop of Rome. So it seems to me they have to. And then, as you point out, and then in church history, you get an even stronger case, because there are times where, like, even when you can read Cyprian, his early letters praising the Pope, then by the end of, as soon as like the Pope disagrees with him about rebaptism, I actually think Pope Stephen was right. But like when Cyprian's like, no, like heretics need to be rebaptized, the Pope is wrong, like towards like at the late time of his ministry.
It's like
interesting.
I had one Roman Catholic friend ask me recently, was like, what would it take for you to consider the papacy? I'm like, pretty much everyone's saying that it's right, because it's a very bold claim to say that the Bishop of Rome is the head of the church. Like, I think sometimes we don't realize how bold of a claim that is. But when you have pretty much everyone saying that the episcopate is right, that, again, binding yourself under an episcopal structure, that isn't as bold of a claim, but I think it is kind of a bit of it's a particular claim. Not so bold, but particular.
It's a much more defensible claim.
It's much more defensible, and it's less bold. So it makes a lot more sense to be strictly trad Anglican than it does to be trad Roman Catholic.
Especially today. I'm like, man, I just do not understand. Like the whole, I just did this study on religious liberty, and I'm like, I like, there's no way, like, this is like, there's so many clear contradictions to me. Like, I just add that to the stockpile of like, there's no plausible way to reconcile this to my mind.
I remember you did, this is an older video of yours, Sean. I remember, and this goes to the point that the recognition of other churches, I think it was the martyrs, right? The Coptic, the Egyptian, I think they're Coptic, right? So obviously if they're martyrs, and you're recognizing part of the church, if you, I mean, you'll get some old Roman theologians saying like, even if you're martyred outside Rome, you're not saved. But of course, no one thinks that now. I mean, no one actually thinks that in the Roman Church.
Trads on Twitter, like that's
like the Pope would never say that. Just to be clear,
Twitter,
But I mean, for me, that was when I was looking. I mean, I don't know. To me, the easiest thing was just like, well, everyone has bishops. I mean, if I look at all the churches that are apostolic, or they be apostolic, and that way they all have bishops. I mean, I look at all the oldest churches; they all have bishops. There's not one that's like didn't have bishops, and they held out against all the non-bishop people for all the time. It's also like the thing is like, even for, this is my little rant, even for the Presbyterians who claim the polity early, my issue always was, we have like no written record like of someone like, they forced bishops on us and we fought back and they just beat us down. Like, no one ever complains about the bishops. Everyone just kind of accepts them whenever we have verifiable proof of them existing.
Or Arius, apparently.
Well, and when you had Arius, it's like him, like everyone before him and after him were like, what are you talking about? And it's very clear he's making the claim because he wasn't consecrated a bishop. Like, he's salty. Like that's and so it's like, he's not consecrated a bishop, so he's like, and so, well, actually the bishops are just the same. So it doesn't really matter. It's like, okay, all right, Arius.
Actually, I had one last thing. I remember going back to what you were saying about the Archbishop of Canterbury, JT. Something that connected to me right there was, it's funny because the Archbishop, I guess from the outside view, the Archbishop of Canterbury, people look at it and they go, "Oh, that looks like a pope." Pope for Anglicans, Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yeah,
And you
Pope.
even saw, even with like the why should the ACNA exist, or is ACNA systematic? You saw that as some of the arguments. What, they're not in communion with the Archbishop of Canterbury. They are treating it as the Pope.
Yep.
Right? Because then it looks like the papal thing. Kind of going even to Richard Hooker's point is, I guess there's some people who would look at it and say, "Oh, that's the Pope."
Yep.
Should we get rid of the,
yeah.
the concept of an archbishop because some people might look at it and think it's a pope?
Yep.
And obviously not,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Except the Puritans were like, yeah, they're down with the episcopacy.
Yeah.
The non-conformists.
The Roman Catholics don't own having bishops or even having archbishops.
Yep.
We can follow the Catholic Church in that. That is lowercase c Catholic Church.
Yep.
And not carry with that the crazy things that we don't like the papacy.
Yeah.
Magisterial infallibility.
Yep. This is also a tangent, but in the 17th century and actually in the 16th century, the thing I've noticed among Anglican writers, they're actually all okay. Like they use Catholic as a capital C Catholic, and they're all okay being like, we are Catholics. We are.
Oh yes,
this is the Catholic Church in England. Like we are Catholic.
Yes.
It's so interesting because they're like they just say that, and like they're like, no, Rome is just wrong about what the Catholic Church is. Yeah.
Bring that back.
I
like that.
I mentioned to somebody a while back that I went to an Anglican church, and she said, "You should go to a Catholic church." And my response was, "It is a Catholic church."
I am going to a Catholic church. It's like, you should go to a more Catholic church.
You should go to a Catholic church.